I think this topic connects very nicely into another key takeaway from our discussion, which was to find guests, because it's the podcast. The podcast is there to help people, the listeners, right? But at the same time, you are also talking about finding guests that you're truly interested in interviewing and what a difference that can make. Because obviously, we're doing this and in this position to be of service and to give and to share, other people's messages and give them a voice and a platform to do that. And when I was trying to pick your brain on how I should be going about finding guests, that was the thing you really got or helped ingrain in my brain, which was, yes, this is for your listeners. You're going to help them. But if you're not interviewing people you're really interested in, how's that going to impact your show? Then that's going to impact the listener in a negative way rather than a positive way. So could you talk about how important it is to find guests that you really care about interviewing and you really want to learn from?
Toward the end of David Bowie's life, he was interviewed. And in that interview, he was asked if he had any regrets as an artist, having been one of the world's most famous pop artists of all time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most successful by every metric. And he said, yeah, my greatest regret is playing to the audience, which means he would put a set together based on what hits he thought the audience wanted to hear. And those were his most flat, uninspiring shows and least well received.
Wow.
And the shows that he would do where he thought, what do I want to play? What's going to light me up were his best shows.
And
so it's a simplistic example of following your heart and following your passion and not having the arrogance to think that you know what's going to best serve the audience. Because everything is energy. Every conversation is based on energy, right? So if there's love in that conversation, if there's curiosity, if there's empathy, compassion, vulnerability, authenticity, honesty, brilliant ideas being expressed, wisdom being passed from one to the other, those elements of a conversation they're the things that determine the energy of that conversation. In other words, like how much power it has, right? So if I'm interviewing someone just because they're popular and I think people are going to want to hear them, or any other reason other than the fact that I really want to interview that person because I'm really obsessed with what they do and I'm really curious about them, energetically that conversation is going to be more flat. And ultimately have less of an impact on the people listening. So the podcasts I think that are really sticky, the ones that really hook, have that sense of curiosity and wonder in the guest. And if you look at a guy like Joe Rogan, who's arguably the most popular podcaster in the world, and you watch his formula, and I've never tried to be like him or something, I think he's just someone that possesses this quality. A guy like Russell Brand would be the same way when he interviews people. Rich Roll, a lot of the really big personalities in podcasting, they have that same quality. When they're sitting there interviewing with someone, they're like, they can't wait. They're hanging on every word, and they're just so pumped up and excited about that person's answers, and they're just so engaged. And as a listener to a podcast, it's not about necessarily what's being said, it's about what's behind what's being said. It's like the music is not the notes, it's the energy behind the notes. The notes are just carriers of energy or carriers of information or data. And likewise in a conversation, the wisdom is not what the words are, it's the energy the words carry. And so if I interview someone for any reason or in a style or method that doesn't exude that enthusiasm and that passion for what they're doing, it's not going to have the same impact. And that would be playing to the audience. Oh, I'm interviewing so-and-so, and they're the expert about such and such, so I'm going to ask the obvious questions that everyone else wants to know. In fact, what I do, it's one of my little proprietary secrets I'll let you in on, when I'm going to interview someone, especially someone whose work I'm not all that familiar with, but they just bleeped on my radar, and so I'm studying up on them to see who they are. Maybe someone has pitched to me that I've never heard of, but they look and sound interesting, so I have to kind of learn about them quickly. I'll listen to just about every podcast they've ever done. I did this with Joe Dispenza. And if you're a Joe Dispenza fan and you listen to my
Absolutely.
episode with him,
Yep.
you'll be able to tell you'll know what I'm talking about. I listened to every episode he did, and every question that he was asked, I made a point to not ask him those questions. Because those questions put Joe Dispenza in autopilot, giving the Joe Dispenza teaching. You can already go find that on 20 other podcasts. I want my conversation with Joe Dispenza to be unique, different, and I want the listeners, especially the listeners that are already familiar with and fans of his work, to go, holy shit, this guy's asking him the coolest stuff. And the coolest stuff is the stuff that I'm most passionate about learning from Joe Dispenza. They're not so much the questions I think people want to hear. They're the questions that people haven't heard. And those are the questions I want to know. So if I can go hear him on Lewis Howes or Aubrey Marcus, why would I ask him the same questions? My own self, I can go listen to that shit and hear the answer to what Joe Dispenza thinks about X, Y, and Z. So I'm going to ask him about obscure shit, like the non-physical entities that visit his events and do healings on people, these 10-foot tall light beings that everyone reports about. That's pretty interesting to me. Why has no one asked him about that? What does he think about ayahuasca and the calcification of the pineal gland? Like, I'm going to ask him things relevant to his teachings, but not directly about his teachings. Things that I really am curious about personally, you know? So, like, those are the things that I can't outsource. That way of doing things.
That comes from you.
And also those are the things that you start to cultivate within yourself and have realizations about as a result of not filling up your consciousness with bullshit like setting up tripods and writing show notes and doing graphic design. So if I'm not doing all that shit, what am I doing? Well, damn, I got a little breathing room. Who would I really like to interview? Oh, I know this one woman, man, is so brilliant, this meditation teacher. Cool, well, let me see if I can book her. I would have never had time to go on her website or get a friend to do an intro or something like that. All of a sudden, boom, I got her on the calendar. Now I start to read her books and listen to all her podcasts and listen to her audiobooks and start to get my questions together. And I'm pumped about this because I've got the bandwidth energetically to really dive in and do it in a meaningful way. And then she comes in and sits down and puts on the mics and she feels my heart just on fire for her wisdom. Like, people feel that. And when people feel that, when you sit down with them, that you really care, you're not just like logging another episode and asking them generic shit, they get touched by that. And when that episode comes out, they remember, I like that one. I remember that interview out of the 20 I did that month. That was cool. Hey, Joey, make sure you push this one, throw it on our YouTube channel, whatever, put it in the newsletter. You know, they dig that shit. And those are the episodes that get promoted more by the guests because you brought the best part of them out because you're using the best part of you, which is not your brain. It's your intuition, your gut, your heart, your feeling, you know, your compassion. You want to really connect with that person. You need bandwidth to be able to access those parts of yourself, the energy within yourself. And all the shit that you don't outsource robs you of that time and energy because you want to save $100. Do I want to save $100, or do I want to put out the best interview with Joe Dispenza that's ever been done? The latter would be my choice. Because what are going to be the positive repercussions and benefits, you know, to me and my whole team if I do it that way?
And to me, that's like one of the main reasons I listen to podcasts. I want to hear things I've never heard before. I want to learn things I've never learned before. And like you were saying, if it's in every single podcast these people have ever been on and it's always the same questions, it's not as inspiring. It's something that isn't gonna draw me in, you know, because I mean that's why I read books, and it's like boom, it turns me on to the next thing and then the next thing and the next thing. I mean, it's endless as far as research and information. But I would love for you to say, before we move on to the next topic, I've never heard what you mentioned about David Bowie. And the reason this is so important to me is because I've gotten a little lost in what we're talking about, which is how to know if I'm being selfish, right? Or what do I need to do in order to be more selfless, especially, you know, getting sober and then starting my life over and starting to live a life of service. And sometimes I think I've actually, you know, made some mistakes along these lines where I've done these things for other people, and it might have turned out differently had I actually really listened to my heart, so to speak. So could you maybe, I've never heard that story or that regret of David Bowie's. Could you say that one more time and just kind of really drive this point home?
Yeah, so David Bowie was asked if he had any regrets about his career and his art, which is making pop music. And he said, yeah, my deepest regret is playing to the audience. And that could mean in concerts, but also in writing songs. Like, oh, should I repeat this chorus 4 more times? Yeah, that'll make it a hit. People are going to want that, And so in terms of art, which having a conversation with someone is an art form, especially if it's documented to share, it is a piece of art. It's a snapshot in time, just like a painting or a photograph or a film. And so it is art. So is making art for yourself selfish? I mean, I don't know if anyone has the answer to that question, but I would say when people historically have made art for themselves, it's coming from the heart. It's where their love is. It's an expression of their love, versus, I think, creating what you think other people want to hear that's going to be a hit typically comes more out of the intellect than out of the heart. That said, when I'm having conversations with people and prepping an interview, I do ask questions that I think are going to benefit the audience. There's a difference there. It's not like, oh, what do they want to hear? I use my intuition and my heart. What do they need to hear? And that's also the thing I'm most passionate about, because the whole purpose of that conversation is to share valuable, life-changing, transformative information with people. But it's not so much, it's not like, what do they want to hear? They don't know what they need to hear, and I believe that in some cases I do know what will benefit them the most. And sometimes that's even a question I already know the answer to, because I've already heard that person answer it, or I've already researched it in another way. So I might do a show about something like 5G and the health risks involved in that technology rollout, and I'll ask someone who's influential that I'm interviewing a question about that I already know the answer to, or a version of it, because I want the audience to hear it for their education, and I want it to be said by someone other than me, especially someone that can back it up with some validity in terms of their credentials. And so I'm not asking it because the audience wants to hear that. I'm asking it because it's important to me that they hear it. That's the difference. So is it selfish? Like, I'm just having a conversation just so I can make my life better and I don't care about the audience? No, it's that I believe that I have a sense for what's really going to be the most impactful on people. But it's still my heart that's leading it. It's not my head thinking, what's going to make this a hit show? It's about what's going to make it the best show. And the best show is going to be the hit show.
So do you have a framework or like a format? Because we're talking about questions, coming up with questions, doing some research into these people, coming from a place of, asking your own unique questions. And then I've also heard, doing my research into starting a podcast and then finding one or building one that's sustainable. People have really dialed in their format where they know this is where they're going to start, then they're going to go here, then they're going to go here. And I really like the freestyle, kind of like free form of talking about what comes up during that conversation. But I feel that that I should have some sort of framework, at least like a skeleton. So do you have a skeleton that you use, and then when you're in the middle of a conversation and things come to you, you just kind of riff and go in that direction as you're kind of maybe called to or guided to? What's that process like?
I always have, I want to know as much as I can about that person because I want to build rapport. So I'll study someone, read their books, or at least, not that I read their whole book, but I skim through it and like, this is get the gist of it, or speed listen to the audiobook, listen to their podcast. Not only do I want to find out about their expertise, but I want to find out about them. So I interviewed a guy a couple days ago, and I heard him on a podcast talking about he has 2 sets of twins. And just during the conversation, because I knew that, I was like, well, yeah, in your case, you have 2 sets of twins. And I saw him be like, oh, word. That's cool. People like that you care, So I'll make a manuscript, or, prepping my notes, and I'll do it in Evernote. And any questions that come to mind, I type them out. and any other notes, like the name of their book or the fact that they have two twin sets or whatever it is, just bits of information that I want to bring up or remember or be cognizant of. Then I'll go through and do a sweep of those and put them in order of what makes the most sense. So if every other podcaster starts out with, so tell us about your new book, or how did you get your start? Tell us a little about yourself, and where'd you go to school? I usually don't do that. I'll start out with a random ass question and just blow up the whole thing from the beginning. So I'll put my questions in whatever order I think they're going to go in. But that's just like a blueprint or a scaffolding that's there as a security measure in case the guest is not, if I'm not able to build rapport with them, or if they're not talkative, or if they're not good at speaking or being interviewed, which is the case sometimes, because sometimes I find people that are very obscure. They're not famous at all. They've maybe never even been on a podcast, but I'm really interested in their knowledge or expertise. And I want to be the first guy that discovers them and puts them out into the world. And I've done that a few times quite successfully with different niche topics and, a device and inventors come up with or something like that. And they're not used to public speaking, or they get gun shy. But the framework of the conversation is just there for two reasons. One, as a safety net in case it's awkward and the rapport isn't free-flowing and it doesn't go into that place of spontaneity and and freedom that you're talking about, where it just meanders and you don't know where it's going to go and it gets super fun and vortexy. If they can't do that, I have that. But also I'd like to have those questions there just so I don't miss something that I was really passionate about asking. Because there'll be some obscure question, like with Joe Dispenza, the one about the entities in his events. Like, who wouldn't want to know about that? That shit's crazy. And it's crazy because a bunch of people describe the same exact thing that don't even know each other. So it's kind of like interesting because it seems to be actually happening. 10-foot beings of light enter into these rooms where they're doing these healings and his things, and everyone, not everyone, but many people see them at different, the whole thing. So I didn't need my notes to have that conversation with him because I know what I want to talk about, and he's a great talker, and we just weaved in and out. But before it's over, I glance over and I'm like, oh shit, Luke, ask him about the entities. So Joe, one last thing I want to ask you. What's up with these entities that visit your events? Yeah, right? So the notes are there for me just so I don't choke and forget to ask something that I really wanted to ask, because I'll go into that flow state and then we might go off in a totally different direction. Like I interviewed a guy a couple of days ago, and it was all about kind of Eastern mysticism and spirituality, and he was on two sets of twins. Panache Desai is his name. He's a British guy who's East Indian. And it's amazing, profound, simple teacher, just has a gift. And so we were talking about all of that and growing up, as an Indian kid in London, and how he met these gurus and learned that he could perform siddhis, these miracles, and had kind of, telepathic powers and all this cool stuff. And I had no idea he'd ever taken plant medicines or ayahuasca, because usually that world and the world of plant medicines don't really...
They don't mix.
Yeah, they don't generally overlap. Then he mentioned something about ayahuasca. I was like, wait, what'd you say? I was like, whoa. And that had nothing to do with my notes because I didn't even know that was part of his story. And then so a bunch of notes that I had just disappeared, and I never even asked him. And then we went into like the parallels between meditation and ayahuasca, because they take you to essentially the same dimensions of reality. And so that wasn't planned, and I wasn't going to stifle that. So I still have a bunch of notes, but here's what I'll do is when I go back and interview someone a second time, I still have them in Evernote, and I'll go in and edit out the questions that I asked the first time, and that'll be the foundation of my manuscript for the second interview. And I'll get to those if I run out of stuff or whatever. So it's like, trust God, tie up your horse, You trust that it's going to flow, and you don't need your notes, but you have the notes there just in case it gets awkward and stale or stuck, or you find that sometimes even the rapport is really good, and you can feel that they're not giving you nonverbal cues that they want to leave, which you have to watch for too as an interviewer. If someone's like, they look around or they start putting their feet toward the door. There's different little cues you can look for that is indicating to you that, okay, I'm done talking. We're done here kind of thing. if you're sensing they're still open and you can feel their heart and they're still looking at you and they have that half smile on their face and they're very engaged, and you can't think of or be inspired to think of the next thing to ask them, that's when the notes really come handy. Like, so you talked about in your book that then it's like you have that as backup in case things kind of go blank, but you still have more time with them and they're still in the zone.
They're ready to keep, or they're still willing to keep going.
Yeah, totally.
Do you have a rule of thumb that you follow? Like 30 to 45 minutes is usually what I'm aiming for, because I know, once we get talking, we like to talk for a long time, and it's fun to have those longer length, hour and a half, even up to 2 hour long conversations. But do you have a rule of thumb that's helpful for anybody that's new to podcasting as far as timelines with your guests?
Well, some of the big shows seem to have shorter interviews. They wrap it up. The whole thing's wrapped up in 50 or 60 minutes with the guest. And a lot of the big shows go on for 2 or 3 hours. So I really don't think there's an optimal time.
How do you navigate that with the guest?
Well, when I first started, I kind of thought, well, how long are podcasts? Well, the interviews are usually, 50 minutes, 55 minutes. Then the other bullshit, fluff, beginning to end, you get like an hour and 10 minutes maybe, because you look on the player and you can see they're generally about an hour. So I thought, okay, I guess mine will be an hour. And then I did a few of them and I'd be watching the clock and I'm like, oh shit, I'm almost out of time. And we're vibing, having a great conversation. I didn't want to cut it off, and then I would cut it off and I'd be like, shit, we could have kept going. So for me, I don't have any set time at all. What I tell the guests is I don't like to go under 60 minutes. And on average, the interviews are about 90 minutes. So when I have my booking link that I send them to book on the calendar, and their little factoid sheet they get that tells them what we're doing and when. In fact, in the booking link, it says 90-minute podcast recording on the Lifestylist podcast. Like, that's the name of the event, is 90 minutes. And if someone indicates to me that they don't have that much time, which sometimes they'll book and then have less time available for whatever reason, they'll let me know, and I'll watch the clock. I actually just I got this idea from Aubrey Marcus. On his desk when he records, he has an hour-long hourglass, because he doesn't like to go for more than an hour. And I've been interviewed by him, and I'm sitting there and I'm like, oh man, this is great. It's about to end, because I see that sand going down. I know he's about to go, so Luke, thanks for coming on. I'm like, damn it. We were just about to go into some shit. But what's good to do is right when you start, because you'll be setting up, you turn the recorder, you light a candle, you do whatever, and you think you started, but you really didn't start. So right when I'm about to click record, I'll say, hey, listen, do you have a hard out? And they're like, yeah, I got to be out of here by 4. Legit. And I go, okay, for sure. Like, hard stop. They're like, yep, 4 o'clock. Okay, cool. So then I'm going to have some way to watch the time. And then at, 3:50, I'm like, okay, last question, Luke, wrap it up. Because I know I'm going to do tell us about your website. And I have my little format I do at the end. So I want to leave 5-10 minutes for that, and it's up to me to do that. And you have to be respectful, because if you keep someone over, they don't know what time it is. They're having a conversation. You're in charge of that. When you interview bigger people, sometimes they'll have a personal assistant with them that'll give you, like, point at the clock or give you a 5,
Yeah.
But if it's just the guest there, especially if you're on Skype recording or Zoom or something, that they won't know really, it's more editing if it goes to the point where they're like, okay, listen, well, I got to go. I'm like out of time. And then you're like, oh shit, I didn't get to ask my closing question. So you want to be the steward of time constraints and make sure. But I personally just always go for 90 and then ask them, do you have a hard out? And if they say no hard out, I don't even pay attention to the 90.
You just feel it
I just keep going, and I go as long as I can until it feels flat. And I feel like now we're just talking to talk. So when the passion starts to wane and it's like, okay, now we're just like, wah, 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 wah. I'm like, okay, cool, last question, let's wrap it up, and I do my little thing.
Okay.
But that's, it's kind of that emotional intelligence piece where you got to really feel into the person. You got to keep your intuition open, your nonverbal communication, looking for those subtle cues. If they start looking around, checking their watch, if they look bored, distracted, frustrated, then it's incumbent upon you to help them and wrap it up. Because some of them are shy and they don't want to be rude. They don't want to be awkward.
Do you ever ask them, or like say, if you're vibing, just be like, hey, I'm really enjoying this conversation. Do you feel...
I try to not ask them on air, because I would probably want it edited out. I don't want like the production showing up on the podcast. But every once in a while I've been like, oh man, this is fun. Can we keep going? I mean, that'll end up on the mic, but usually I don't want that on the recording.
But can you go back and chop that
Yeah,
out?
yeah. I mean, an editor can.
Yeah.
What I'll do is like when I'm done with an episode, like the other day I recorded with someone. This has actually never happened to me before. I think just because the topics at hand were a bit controversial. And it's weird because we had a phone call first and I told him what I wanted to talk about and he seemed on board with that. I don't think I was pulling out any surprise zingers or anything, but we were talking about sort of controversial stuff and he was cool and we were going along with it. And then toward the end, I'd ask him something and he was like, yeah, I'm not going to comment on that. Yeah, let's move on. I was like, oh, okay, fair enough. He's a doctor, so you have a medical license, nowadays you got to be careful. So I get it. Then I asked him a couple more and I don't know, I don't think I was that on my game. It's harder to get these nonverbal cues and stuff when you're on Zoom too. When you're sitting with someone, you see their little toe move. Like if you're really paying attention and very present, they're getting uncomfortable or they want to leave or they're just done. You can't tell that on Zoom because you just see a head and it's delayed and all that. But anyway, I asked him that and I was like, oh, that got a little awkward feeling. And then kind of happened again. He's like, yeah, that same there. Nope. Yeah, I'm not gonna go there. And then I threw in like one more. He's like, okay, so I think we're done here. We're good. We're good. I was like, oh, fucking weird vibes. Yeah, it was super embarrassing. Now I'm gonna edit that out, but I was like, shit, that bad read there, Luke. I did not see that coming. We were having a great talk, lots of rapport, everything was fine. So, a point being, I think even when you really pay attention and you really obviously I really respect him. I'm not trying to put him on the spot or anything. That's not my vibe at all. I'm just, dude, if you know the answers, I really want the answer to these questions, even though they are a little controversial. So, every once in a while things will go a little bit astray. But what I do, I know what I was getting to, is after each interview, if there's anything that happened in there that I'm like, yeah, that was weird, I'll go right away and go into Slack and hit up my team at Crate Media. It's the company that produces my show. And I'll be like, hey, at the end, cut out the part where he's like, yeah, we're done, and kind of ghosts me. Like, get rid of that shit. Cut out my questions that I asked him that he didn't want to answer, so you never even hear the question, let alone him going, yep, not going to, nope. So it just brought the vibe down. We were like nailing it, and then all of a sudden it was like, screeched to a stop. So any notes like that, or I had a friend over who's a buddy, and we started out kind of informally just shooting the shit, and we started talking about all these kind of social issues and, social justice warrior, political correctness kind of stuff. And we know each other and we know we're both good people and are kind and caring and open and just have integrity. So we could talk about things like that without getting triggered. Yeah. But the people listening might not understand who we are, the perspective we're coming from. So it was a little too risque for my taste, but I didn't realize it until I think he texted me or called me a couple hours later, and he's like, dude, we got to cut out that whole first 20 minutes. Like, that shit can't go out. We're going to get in trouble. The world's just too sensitive. People just get too butthurt by you can't be real anymore, in some ways. So I thought, I don't like to edit something for other people because I'm afraid, but the shit we were talking about would have probably got us a bunch of trolls. Because we were really ragging on. Yeah, it's like, why do I want to bring that on myself? I like triggering people sometimes to wake them up out of their stupidity, as I perceive it to be. But this was like super un-PC, and we were talking like no one was listening, just me and a homie over, you know what I mean? And that's not necessarily how I want to represent myself publicly, especially for people that don't personally know me and they don't have the context of understanding where my heart is. So I might make a comment that's really offensive to someone, but I don't mean anything by it. I'm just being funny and kind of irreverent, So there's been a few times where I've had to alert the editors that we just want to clean parts of it up and take things out. I also, and I'll give you this one last one, because it does happen every once in a while. Thankfully not that often, but I went and did a peyote ceremony, well, a bunch of them, and I wanted to interview the shaman team that led the ceremonies, and they agreed to do the interview, and I during the interview mentioned, the person's house where we were and the town that we were in, and asked them about like, well, how do you travel with the peyote? What is, like, how do you cruise around? And they answer the questions. And then afterward, I don't remember if it was that day or they sent me a text. They were like, dude, you got to edit out. Can we see the video before you put it out, please? And would you please edit out the part where you said the guy's name, where we are, and all this stuff, because they're like, this is illegal. Now, they didn't really think about it in the moment because we're all with us, and we just got out of the ceremony, and it's all chill. Like, no one's thinking about the freaking it's not the FDA. What is the DEA, or something like that? I don't think they're too worried about peyote. Trust me, it's not addictive. It's pretty gnarly, but they didn't feel comfortable with some of the things discussed in the way they were. So I had to alert my editors, take out the parts that mention the illegality of it and that are potentially, legally damaging to the guest and things like that. So
anything that would put anybody in a weird
position.
position.
You don't want to compromise anyone's, because they're going to be somewhat anonymous, but they wouldn't be that hard to find if you wanted to. So, we had to frame it in a way that didn't have any evidence of wrongdoing, which of course we weren't, because we were in another country at the time where peyote is totally legal. But yeah, there's random things like that people come up. The thing people don't like talking about, I'll tell you right now, is vaccines. Every guest that I've had on, I haven't asked every single person, but everyone I have asked off mic say I didn't vaccinate my kids. I would never vaccinate my kids. Any celebrities I've interviewed, the top doctors in the world are like, they look at me like I'm nuts. Like, are you kidding me? Vaccinate my kids? And they're like, but we can't talk about that on the show. Because they'll lose their license, they'll get blacklisted, they'll get edited from or banned from social media, they'll get censored.
Wow.
That's the, sort of authoritarian world that we live in that's run by Big Pharma, and so there are topics like that you got to be really careful about, because they'll get in a lot of trouble, because that's where we live in our society, unfortunately, right now. You can't even ask a question like, well, is this safe? Can we prove this thing that everyone's supposed to do is safe? Nope, can't talk about that. Really? I'm not anti. I just want to know if it's safe, and if it's not, can we make it safe before we make everyone do it? Nope, you're banned. It's crazy, dude.
Wow.
It's wild, yeah. It's the way it is. I had a guy on who doesn't give a fuck about any of this, and he has such integrity, he just keeps charging away. His name is Del Bigtree, and I had him on a couple years ago, and the title of that show was Vaccine Safety, Science and Fiction. And the premise of the show was the errors in the medical system that don't require safety testing for vaccines that we're giving kids, and evidence about kids that have been injured by them, and the need for safety testing before we put this stuff in kids. It wasn't an anti-vaccine show, but he's called an anti-vaxxer, and the episode was called an anti-vaccine episode by some people, and some people called me that. I never said we shouldn't do vaccines. I just said if we're going to do them, they should be proven safe, and that they actually work, which is completely logical to me. So you have to be mindful of things that guests are willing and not willing to talk about. And a good practice, I'll end with this, is that an easy way is just when you ask the guest, when you start, like, do you have a hard out? Like, do you got to leave at any certain time? Also, if you're going to be touching on anything potentially controversial, you ask them ahead of time, off mic, is there anything you don't want to talk about? Is there any topics you'll get in trouble if you talk about or anything like that? Because you might interview a celebrity or someone in politics or someone who's very socially visible, and they don't want to talk about school shootings and the Second Amendment or things that could get the big pharma police after them and whatnot. But that's pretty rare that you're even going to potentially touch on that. But it's a good
use
it's a good practice.
Still.
Yeah, it's a good practice.
Always ask.
Especially like if you know some of your questions. If you're typing out your manuscript to interview someone and you're like, oh shit, are they gonna get pissed if I ask them this? That's the thing you ask them before the interview. I was thinking of touching on this thing. Are you cool with that? And sometimes they're like, yeah, man, go for it. I don't give a shit. I'll say what I want to say. And you're like, yes. And sometimes they're like, nope, don't ask me that. We can talk about it off camera, off mic, And especially the vaccines. You can hardly get anyone to talk about that. It's too dangerous. So, yeah.
Okay. I want to go back up to the surface. We've
Yeah.
gone deep, and speaking of time and wrapping it up, I want to respect your time and really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's going to be very helpful for anybody
Me
who
too.
wants to start a podcast, or anybody that maybe has a podcast that's going but wants to make a greater impact, or somebody who just might be starting their life over and examining new potential ideas as far as things that they could do in the world that they would enjoy. So the surfacey thing is, we've talked about fire, aim, ready, just going in and going for it, and then figuring it out as you go. We talked about paralysis by analysis, getting out of your head and coming from a more heart-centered place. And as far as picking guests, coming from a place of really being interested in the guest and curious about what they're going to present, and batching content. So I'm just giving a little rough overview here at the end. But one thing we didn't talk about that I know is challenging, and just talking to your girlfriend a little bit about it was hard for her, and I know we've talked about it, which is naming a podcast. Like the School of Style, you said, came to you. So we're going back up a little surfacey, but I know it weighs on people's minds. And then when you figured out, I want to do Lifestylist Podcast, it seems like that came to you and you just knew. And you've even said it like that, like, I just knew, or the title of your book, I just knew. It came to me, the download happened, and boom. And I'm certain, like, there's absolute certainty on that.
Yeah.
I haven't really had that experience.
Yeah.
I'm not great with names. The type of person who does overanalyze everything, and I'm like, well, this is good, but then but, right? So what would be a formula or something that you found helpful to arrive? I know some of these names that have come to you have happened in non-traditional ways, but is there a way to at least get the flow going, at least get that kind of into action so you can actually make a little momentum?
Yeah, I think a lot of people do have a really difficult time with the name, and that is one of the things that you do have to have in order to launch.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to have this struggle a lot when I was a musician, and we'd try to come up with a band name. It's really difficult at times, because unless it's an authoritarian, hierarchy in terms of you have a band leader who writes all the songs, they're the lead singer, they're the man, and everyone else just kind of works for them, which is fine. Sometimes that's a great arrangement. But to get 5 or 6 knuckleheads, they're usually egomaniacs, to agree on a name is challenging. And when you look at the bands in history, and you hear the stories of them coming up with the name, they'll be all hanging out talking about the name, and then one guy's like, hey, what about the thing? And everyone's like, yeah, that's it. And everyone knows when they know, but how do you strike genius, intentionally? It's one of those things that it's just, you have to be open and receptive to the name coming out of the ethers, out of universal mind, and then having the skill to know when it really hits your gut and you're like, that's it, that's the one. And I think I actually, and I'm saying with the utmost humility, because I know that I didn't give myself this gift, but I really do think I have a gift for names. I also have a gift for like when bands are going to break, or when a song is going to be a hit. Like, I know when I hear a hit song. I've always been that way. I'm really good at it. There's a lot of things I'm less skilled at, but that's just something that that I've been pretty good at. But I have also gotten stuck on names for a while. It's not that I don't struggle coming up with the name. It's just that I know when I know the name. Like, I just know that's the one. Like my book, A Horse Named Lonesome. There's a whole story behind it we don't have time to go into, but I thought of that name because when I was a kid, I had a horse named Lonesome. And then there's a whole meaning behind it and how it pertains to a book. But and I could be the only one in the world. We'll find out, when I shop the damn thing. But A Horse Named Lonesome is a dope book title. It's just dope. I just know it is. And I have a feeling it's going to be a popular book. Not only because of the title, but just what's in it. And like you said, School of Style, The Lifestylist. There's been a few other things, different URLs that I've picked up because there might be another business that are pretty good and things like that. But I think that it's a really tough one because you can't really launch until you get your name. That said, look at all the podcasts that are huge, that have the lamest names ever. Look at all the bands that have the shittiest names ever. What does that mean? The Beatles? B-E-A-T? That is the corniest shit ever. The Beatles? The Foo Fighters? Like most big bands have the stupidest freaking names.
That one made me.
And there's a few that have, you know, Led Zeppelin, amazing name. Yeah. Rolling Stones, amazing name. I mean, there's a lot of bands where you're like, shit, you guys nailed it. That's a dope name. Yeah. But there's probably more bands with shittier names. Yeah. And I'm thinking of all the 60s bands, because, you know, those are kind of my favorites. But The Doors, like what? I was listening to The Doors this morning. That is the worst band name ever. The Doors, really? The Doorknobs. Okay, what a cool name. No, it doesn't really matter. It's like once you launch, and that's your thing. And you can also change the name. So, you know, if you started your podcast and it was like the Starting Over podcast with Cody Storey, and you're like, this shit's corny, but I got 15 interviews in the can and I got to put it out. Dude, a month later, you change the art, you change the, you know, the listing in Libsyn, and your podcast has a different name. Does anyone know? No. Does anyone care? No. I remember I hated my podcast cover art for the first 3.5 years. I finally changed it to a new one. My new one is it's just a better version of the old one because I couldn't come up with anything new. I don't even like the new one, but it's just like, whatever. I got to just do something. Doing something is better than doing nothing. So there's not a very clear answer to that, except, you know, tuning into your intuition and that inner voice when you're like, you just get a feeling when you say the name of your podcast. You're like, you say 10 names that you've come up with and you wait for the one that's got the biggest hit. That's like, boom, that one's got a little sting to it, you know, in a positive sense. It's the one I like. I had that happen with you when we were bouncing your names around, the Metamorphosis podcast. To me, I'm like, ding, 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 jackpot, that's the fucking name. But I'm not you. You know, you have to feel into it yourself. But, you know, my girlfriend starting a podcast, she just had the same thing. And we spent and this is a good practice, we spent a whole night writing down every keyword that's relevant to the type of content she wants to do. And she's a shaman, so it was like ceremony this, shaman this, indigenous this, tribal this, whatever. Vibration this, chakra this, just every word, and then you put this one before that one, and you combine the words and just do word salad with them until you're like, bing. Now we did have a couple good hits, and then we went in the podcast app, and there was already one name that. And you're like, ah, shit, someone thought of it first. However, through that process, she did come up with a name. And when she said the name, I was like, ding, 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 that's it. I said, do you get the ding, ding, ding? She's like, yep, that's the name. Boom, done. Never think about it ever again. And then once it's done, like even mine, the lifestylist, I don't even know if that's a good name. It's just the one that stuck. Sometimes I'll look at it and I'm like, is that a stupid ass name? I don't even know because I don't care because I'm already doing it and it is what it is. Maybe there's a cooler name, you know, for the podcast. I don't know. But I think you just, again, you can't get stuck in analysis and you can't overanalyze it. It needs to be whatever the one is as best you can do or anyone you know can do for you, the one that gives you the most hit. That's that little tingle of emotional, you know, curiosity or excitement. And that's
the ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, it's like that jackpot, ding, 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 ding. You know, the thing that does that, even if like it only does it 1%, if it does it 1% more than the other 5 dumb names you came up with, then that's your name and you just move on and know that it's not forever. It's not going to be written on your tombstone, you know, and even if it is, who cares? In 1,000 years, that tombstone's going to be turned back into dust and grow worms, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's not that big of a deal. It's better to come up with something and launch than it is to overanalyze it, you know? But I'm telling you, for you, my Metamorphosis podcast is dope. I like that one. Right when I said it or you said it, I was like, yep, that's a good name. Because it's simple and it's to the point, and it represents in general what you want your show to be about without it sounding super corny. To me, it sounds more interesting than like the Starting Over or something new with Cody Storey, you know, or like I'm doing this life again with Cody Storey. You know, it's like any other way of saying that, you know, the midlife crisis hour with Cody Storey. I mean, what do you even, you know, how do you say that? Metamorphosis is dope because you're like, ooh, there's, you know, it's like something's transmuting into something new. It has a little bit of a spiritual element to it, you know, and
well, that's what we were talking about. We were talking about transformation and change and starting over.
Yeah.
And, you know, what was the other one you were talking about? Oh, man, it was good. How every story is basically about overcoming adversity.
Yeah.
Like that was really the core of what I want to elicit out of the interviews is people's experience or stories about overcoming adversity, or what we define or call failure, or whatever, mistakes, pitfalls, XYZ. But yeah, it was really about transformation and metamorphosis.
Every good story worth its salt has the same underlying theme. A person is faced with a problem that they don't know how to overcome. They're stuck, they're in pain of some kind, so they set out to solve their problem, but they don't have the answers. So they find an oracle, a guide, a teacher, a mentor that has walked the path before them, gives them the knowledge, then they take that knowledge and they overcome with a little boost from that person, and they solve whatever their problem is and get out of their current predicament or have a transformation. And most mythological stories, and even true stories that become popular stories, follow that same basic format. It's like people like to see someone else hit up against a wall and find a way to get past it. Because everyone wants to be the hero in their own journey. That's why when I started my show, I never came from the position like, I'm Luke Storey, I have all the answers, and I'm up here on the hilltop telling you peasants how to do it. I'm like, I'm right there, they're riding shotgun with me. I'm like, hey, you guys, let's figure this shit out. How do you do a healthy relationship? How do you, lose weight? How do you not get EMF brain damage? How do you learn to meditate? How do you find God? Like, let's find this out together. And it's a co-discovery. And maybe I'm, for the listeners, I'm their guide. I'm their Yoda that's helping them find their own way. But it's not because I found the way, or I'm going to find the way for them. I'm going to give them the tools, and they're going to find their own way. And that's what those great stories and parables do for us, is they give us the inspiration and courage to go find our own way and solve the problems for ourselves, to be the hero of our own story. So that's a great premise. I mean, in a sense, most podcasts of this nature in the personal development realm are like that. You have someone that's discovered an amazing supplement, and why did they do that? Oh, my mom died of Alzheimer's or cancer or whatever, and it set me out on my life's mission. I'm going to find a cure, or the right diet, or whatever it is for that. Like, most good stories have that adversity at the core, and that was the impetus for that person to go find a solution. And then once they found the solution, they were so overwhelmed with joy that they felt it necessary to go share that solution and help other people do it. It's just, it's how humans are wired. Monkey see, monkey do.
No, it's very true. Yeah, Jordan Peterson talks about that. It's a real thing. We're the one creature that can actually emulate like we do.
Right.
So I want to ask you one final question.
Yep.
What would be a suggestion or a recommendation if someone is thinking about starting a podcast, or in the process of starting a podcast, something that they could apply to really get them going?
Well, aside from the things we've talked about, which pertain more to getting over the hurdles of actually starting the damn thing, the number one most important thing to me with all content creation, if you're gonna make a living out of creating content, I'll just preface it by saying, if you're gonna make a living out of creating content, you're gonna follow two models initially. One's going to be, you have a product or service already that you want to promote, and a podcast or whatever content you're making is going to be your marketing arm. That's going to be the driver of brand or individual personality awareness to bring people into your sphere, into your tribe, and allow them the opportunity to buy your product or service. The second model is my model, which is more of an influencer model, which is, you haven't figured out what your offering is yet. So your offering is content. And you're going to put content out, and you're going to create revenue based on promoting other people's products and services until you have your own. So those are kind of the two reasons you're going to do it from a business standpoint. But the most important thing to do in order for either one of those models to be successful is to focus on consistency. And so you have to set up realistic expectations on yourself based on where you are in your life. If it's going to cost you X amount of dollars to have each episode of your podcast produced, and you have another job, and your disposable income is $400 a month, and each episode costs you $200 to produce, which will probably be more if you hire people, to be honest, then you're doing 2 episodes a month. And that's what you're going to commit to your audience. So you're going to say, every 2 weeks, guys, here comes the Metamorphosis podcast with Cody Storey. It's every other Monday or whatever, right? And you do not miss an every other Monday ever until you tell the audience, hey guys, I'm ramping it up to every Monday. You do that for 2 years, you're like, damn, I can't keep this up. I got this other company, this other thing. Hey guys, big announcement. We're going to be cutting the show down to once a month, every month, whatever it is. So whether you do written content, video content, audio content, you have to be consistent. And the reason for that is when you build an audience and you build a tribe, you cannot stand them up for a date. Can you tell your girlfriend, hey babe, every Wednesday night I want us to like have some one-on-one quality time. We're going to do it every Wednesday. And then next Wednesday comes, you're like, you know what? I think I'm going to go to the gym. That relationship is not going to last. So imagine you have a relationship with a couple 100,000 listeners at some point, hopefully millions, and they're expecting your show on Wednesday night and your show doesn't come out. They're like, oh, next podcast, I'm done.
Yeah.
Not because they're pissed and disappointed like your girlfriend would be if she likes you, but because they've depended on that and they want that fix. And if you're not going to give it to them, they're like, I'll listen to Rogan, So consistency is number one, and looking at Lauren, my business partner that she has I forget how many subscribers now, but a lot of YouTube subscribers, huge YouTube channel. Her model was consistency. She did a video 5 days a week for the first couple of years. She'd batch them all out. She'd spend a weekend, she'd record 25 videos or whatever, 25 days worth of content. And she would do that. Then she started to build up her sales through her building up her audience because she had online offerings and things like that. And then she's like, I can't do this shit. Then she announced, hey guys, we're going down to 3 days a week. Then eventually I think it was 2, and now I think it's 1 day a week she does it. But she makes sure the audience understands how often it's coming out, and she sticks to that until there's a huge announcement of some kind of update where it changes. So consistency is king because you have to stay relevant, you have to stay top of mind. There's podcasts that I listen to. One of them is Tom Knowles' Vedic Knowledge. He's a Vedic meditation teacher, and his podcast is so good. He's really brilliant, and he has guests on sometimes. They're also consistently brilliant. But I never really go listen to it because it only comes out every few months, just randomly. I'll just happen to click on it one day. I'm like, oh shit, there's a new episode. It's, July 8th. And then why? I don't know. There's no set schedule, so I'm not an avid listener to that podcast because there's no consistency to the content. Probably doesn't matter to him because it's not a huge driver of his business. He's got his own whole, teaching meditation thing going on. So he probably doesn't do it for the 2 reasons that I described earlier. It's just maybe some bonus content for people to follow him or building some subtle brand awareness. But if Tom Knowles wanted to have a hit podcast, it's got to be every month, every 2 weeks, every week, twice a week, every day, whatever it is. And when it comes to consistency and committing, I would also recommend do not overcommit yourself because it's a lot of work putting out one-hour podcast a week. It's a lot of work. Not at first. First, it's all fun. You're like, ooh, I'm making the graphic. Ooh, I learned how to edit my own audio shit. Ooh, I bought a video camera. Yay. Booked a couple guests. I figured out how to use Zoom and Skype. And you're like, I'm on this shit. I'm going to do it every day. No, your ass is not. After a while, it gets old, son. And that's why the stuff that I talked about in the beginning, batching, outsourcing, delegating, you start to get super burned out because you've committed to that consistency. Even with mine's always been every Tuesday, so 4 a month, but I started putting out bonus shows when I will go do a speaking gig, I'll record it and put it out as a Friday bonus show. So now I average 6 a month, and it's like, whew, even though those ones require less production because I'm just kind of multi-purposing some other content. The real gig was going to do the speaking thing, and then I just throw the file up and, as a quick bonus episode. But even that, like, I got to name it. I have to put it on the calendar. I have to do the intro. Someone has to do the art. It's still something to do, even though it's much less work than my traditional interview episodes. But I committed. So I'm like, I didn't really say. They know they're going to get it every Tuesday. And I say, yeah, and, I'll say, like, yeah, we're going to show every Tuesday. That's the official show. So they know, the official release. Then sometimes we do bonus shows on Fridays. And if it pops up in their feed, they're probably like, oh, sick. It's a bonus show. But they know it's not the real show. It's not the weekly, like, standardized Lifestylist podcast.
They know every Tuesday.
Yeah, and I will never, as long as I'm alive and have committed to doing it, I will never miss a Tuesday, ever. Never have, never will. Just
and
no
also
matter what.
Thanks to being 3 months, 4 months.
Yeah. Yeah, I
you
mean,
know,
right now we're at the end of March.
banked up.
I have enough episodes right now at the end of March to last me, a weekly episode to last me till the end of June. So I don't technically have to interview anyone until like the second week of June if I just stopped right now.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some people, now I'm on Zoom because we're in Armageddon lockdown and stuff. So I'm cranking a few out just because I feel like it, but I don't need them. They're still not going to come out until June or July when I record them right now. You got to tell people that too. Sometimes people get pissed because, well, not pissed, but they're just disappointed.
They're waiting for their show to
well,
come
they
out.
even before you interview them, like I interviewed someone the other day who has a book coming out like in 2 weeks, and he's like, "Hey, dude, I need some help with promo for my book. Can I come back on the show?" And he's a great guy, and I really wanted to support him. I was like, "Yeah, you can come back on, but I can't put it out until mid-May because my calendar's already set." And when I'm working with the production team, they have all of these sequences and triggers in their production flow, kind of in their assembly line, and I can't come in and be like, "Oops, I'm changing this episode name or number," because it's all like automated, and it's quite complex actually, their whole system. Different software talks to each other and does all this shit. It's super automated, so I throw like a wrench in the spokes if I fuck with it. So, and, he's like, "Dude, can you just put out any sooner? It's your show. People don't get it." I'm like, "Yeah, it's mine, but I'm still not totally in charge." Then I have to contend with a bunch of people that I'm really inconveniencing because I switch things up on them. So, sometimes when you batch out as far as I do in advance, it has that negative impact. Somebody's excited to come on the show, and then they're a little disappointed because it's going to take so long to get their episode released into the queue. But it's whatever. It just is what it is. I figured out a solution the other day for one. For example, though, now I put in the calendar twice a month a solo show, and I determine what the solo show is going to be. I might just talk for a while. I might answer questions. It might be a speaking gig I did, as I said, that I repurpose. Whatever format, whatever the solo show fits. But I had one on the calendar, and I interviewed this guy, and it's a very timely topic. It's about everything that's going on in the world right now. So I couldn't wait till June. So I just nixed my solo show, and I'm slipping this one in as episode 272 or whatever it is, like really fast in the queue, because I could technically do that because I already had a slot with an episode of me in there, and I just made it a different guest, So sometimes there's little workarounds, but you don't want to get in the habit of changing the calendar because it screws up the whole production flow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Consistency is still king,
the answer to your question is consistency is king. That's it. Just keep doing it.
Even if it's one
same thing with social media.
Every other week, it's the same day, no matter what,
and the same time. And then you could be like 8 a.m. every Wednesday morning, guys. Here we are, Metamorphosis Podcast. Subscribe. That's how it goes. Consistency is king, and that's true with anything you want to get good at too. If you want to learn piano, good luck sitting down every 6 months. Play for 10 minutes every day. You get good really fast instead of once every 6 months for 2 hours. Consistency. Same with social media. People struggle building their social media accounts, like an Instagram account, and I'm like, "Oh man, I'm stuck at 20,000 followers, and I'm like way more well known than some of these people that have 200,000. What's the deal?" I'm like, "How often do you post?" "Oh, I post like every couple weeks." I'm like, "No, dude, you got to post once a day." "Yeah, but I don't have the perfect thing." So what? Like, who cares? People just want consistency. They want to see you're doing stuff. You want to keep people engaged. I think that's way more important than the content being perfect. It's more about, like, does it come out on a routine that people start to get accustomed to? So people follow me on Instagram. I want them to be like, "I wonder what shit Luke put in his stories today. Did he do a live this week?" Yeah. Or they see a post, Luke always has cool posts. They're looking through their feed, scrolling through, like, let me click into that, see what he did, rather than like, forget about him. And then there's 10 other people that come to the top of their feed, and they're going to click into theirs and comment on it. It's just like, you want to be in people's grill, and you want to be doing it in a way that's authentic and that's heartfelt, and you want to interact with people and, have a relationship with your content, and your relationship as a relationship with the people that consume it. So if you want to have a relationship of any kind, you have to cultivate it and keep it alive.
Beautiful. Well, thank you
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you taking the time to do this, even though we already had this conversation. But I just felt like I want to capture this moment in time because I always look back, whether it's the next day, and I'm like, man, we should have recorded that, or a week, 2 weeks goes by, and I'm like, that could have been really useful. But for some reason, I could have just grabbed a phone like we're doing today, just an iPhone and a mic, hook it up and just done it.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's easy to just brush this stuff to the side. So I was glad you recommitted, speaking of that,
Totally.
to doing this today. We also have a show, which is going to be my first podcast ever in the history of my existence, which is going to be on Wednesday, April Fool's Day, which is kind of awesome.
Sweet.
And
I won't show up.
Yeah. Okay, here, I'll knock on the door.
Dude? What? I'm at the beach, homie. What? Recording? What are you talking about?
That'll be good. Yeah. But if you need to move it back from 12, we could do later. Like today wasn't that bad. I got my nap in. Good. I was able to come here.
You'll get
a
better me at 3 than you will 12. But
we'll probably push it back. So if you're watching this, we're going to push it back because I know for me, just testing today, saying I was going to try to get here at 2, it wasn't good because my schedule, starting my life over, is crazy. Like I'm the type of guy that's been waking up for 15 years straight at like 5 in the morning when it's still dark out, and I'm adjusting. So I'm trying to figure out how this works. As you've been a night owl, I became an early bird, not out of my nature, out of necessity, and now I'm kind of stuck in between these two. Like we watched Ozark till like 11 o'clock, and that's.
I'm gonna go do that right now.
We've done it like 2 nights in a row, and I'm like, oh, dude, it's like 11, then it's 11:30. And I probably don't fall asleep for a half hour. I'm not used to staying up at 12 and then me waking up at 8. So I'm trying to like find the new rhythm, and I like getting up when the sun's coming up because it works for me. But right now I'm at about the 8 o'clock a.m. So going from 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. But now my nap is falling, instead of like at 11, my nap is falling at like more like 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
So 9 till 1 is production now of like doing whatever I'm into at the moment. And I'm working, but I get, I have a little slump in the middle of the day. So I was like, today was a good test for Wednesday. So I was like, maybe pushing it back. I know he would like that, 1. And 2 is, it's kind of more of my natural rhythm right now. So we'll probably do that if you're open to it.
Yeah. It's whatever, man. It's all good. I actually now, as I was telling you that I've been finally, after all these years, I get up at 6:30, 6:40, and I race up the hill in my car with my dog and watch the sunrise every day and do my breath work. Today I didn't do it because last night I did a mushroom journey here with my girlfriend, and I wasn't up that late, but I felt like I needed some sleep to kind of recover from that and whatnot, which is actually funny, speaking of Ozark, because I'm like, when I don't really watch TV much, but if there's a show that really hooks me, I'll binge the shit out of it. So we're on like we're about to watch episode 4. And we were going to watch it last night, and I was like, you know what? It's Saturday night. We've been cooped up. I've had a bunch of mushrooms in my freezer. They're really high quality, like very high vibe, and I feel safe, as someone who's been sober for a long time, that I'm not going to do it with the wrong intentions or, have it cascade into some sort of
weird setting or on weird people.
Just, no. And that's why I've never done it, actually. I've never done that at home, and I felt like it lately. I said, I wonder why I want to do that. Do I want to escape my problems? No, I don't have any problems. I love who I am, and I love my life, and I love my girlfriend, my house. Like, I'm not even bothered by this corona shit personally. I feel for the other people that are, but I'm not. So anyway, we're going to watch the Ozark. And so I took 1 truffle, which is about 1 gram, which really, in my experience, is not very much for mushrooms. I would usually eat like
3.
Yeah, 3.5 grams, 7 grams, something 5, like a huge handful usually. So anyway, and she just wanted to take a sliver, just a micro, just to kind of test the waters. Wasn't sure if she wanted to really dive in. So I said, all right, here. Let's eat them right now, set our intentions, get candles ready, get the playlist ready for when they come on. We'll watch an episode of Ozark first.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, and we ate them, and I came downstairs and did something. I lit some candles, and I was like, too late. They hit so fast. And she was like, dude, we ain't watching Ozark. I was like, fuck no. The TV was on, with like paused. And I looked up, I was like, no, shut it off. I can't look at TVs or computers.
That might be a very weird combination.
Yeah, so thankfully I had the wisdom to not mix those two worlds. But I remember being in the middle of the journey being like, shit, man, this is fun, but I'm bummed I couldn't watch Ozark. So tonight I'm gonna do that.
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to end on, and you said, hey, thanks for taking the time and all that, man. It's like, now I'm almost 50 years old, right? Which I feel like I'm like 22 in every way. Maybe a little more mature, hopefully, but I'm just so curious and excited, and just I feel so full of life, and I feel so healthy and energetic most of the time, and so I don't feel 50, but I am in a place in life now where I'm starting to see that, I don't use this word, but like when you move into the elder phase of life, and I don't mean that like I'm the wise elder, just elder in that you're older than a lot of people you fuck with, you hang around with, and so I find, wow, I really do have a lot of knowledge and experience and wisdom to share, and it's so fun to be able to pass it along because it's all so hard earned. It's like shit that I studied and listened to and read and sat at the feet of my teachers and gurus and making so many mistakes and all of that. It's like there's pretty much nothing as fun to me as taking my time to share the things that I've learned and giving back to people that are, at a place in the journey where they're just starting out, something I started out a while ago or something like that. And so it's like, I don't even notice the passage of time, or it's not like a sacrifice of time. And I still have people in my life that are, 10, 20 years older than me, and they sit down with me and do shit like this for free, just for fun. And I feel like, oh my God, thank you so much. I can't believe you just sat down. And they're like, what? This is awesome, Because when you teach, that's how you really learn. So everything that I just shared with you, I'm just like cementing into my being. So you know what? I'll probably sit down tomorrow and find someone to do my goddamn Instagram post for my podcast, because that's still part of the supply chain that I'm handling that I shouldn't be handling. So teaching about it reminded me, you still got to tighten this up. There's still stuff you're doing that you don't technically have to be doing yourself. And it burns me out every Tuesday. I'm like, oh God, I gotta do I forgot to do my goddamn podcast post today, getting the IGTV clip, finding the thumbnail, going on my computer, writing the copy. It takes me like an hour. If I put my mind to something useful, I could have just written an hour worth of my book. I could have written, a quarter chapter of a book, or called a book agent, or done something like a big needle moving activity instead of just like, oh, there's one little Instagram post, which is a blip on the world's radar for 1/10,000th of a second of someone's life, So thank you for asking me to share some of the things that I've learned and that I'm still learning. It's just so fun to actually also, compartmentalize the things that I've learned and to see them in front of me like, oh, this is cool. It's like, okay, all that shit that I've been through is actually worth it because I've learned something, because if I didn't know it, I wouldn't be able to explain it. But I have learned it. And the exciting thing is that there's even more to learn. But let me lock this in by sharing it with someone else. So it's really great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks again. And I'm looking forward to the first podcast with you.
Yeah. You got to have a name settled by then.
I know. We better be praying for some downloads over here.
You have to be like, Luke, welcome to the blank podcast,
Yeah.
You don't have to. It's funny. I always try to mix up the way I start the show, but I always end up going, Cody, welcome to the Lifestylist Podcast, or welcome to the show. And every time I do, I'm like, that's so generic. Like, why don't you just be like, it's a dope plant, huh? Yeah, so anyway, what's going on? Or like, I don't know, whatever. Any other way of just meandering into the beginning of a conversation without having like, hey, welcome to the podcast, Jim. It's just, I don't know, it's something I'm working on.
Maybe it's like an internal, when you start a movie or whatever, it's like a or like saying action. Like
it kind of is. Well, it kind of is actually, because then I think I got in that habit as an indicator to the audio and video editors that's the point it starts, because we might be rolling sound and recording, have like hot mics, just, oh, hey, how's the kids, blah, 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 and they're sitting down and all that's being captured, and I did it as an indicator at a point in time, like timestamp, okay, this is when it starts, to tell them. But I realized they would probably figure it out even if I didn't do that. And I've listened to some, and then we'll shut up, but I've listened to a couple podcasts that are really cool. They'll just have the mic set up and the people walk in and they just start talking and, yeah, I was just in the hallway, that dude in the elevator, oh, it's crazy, man, did you get a donut? Yeah, blah, 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 and they're just like, they just start talking and then it just becomes the podcast. I'm like, holy shit, how did they do that? There's no official start. I forget what one it was, but there was one, and that was their format every time.
Wow.
That's how my friend Aaron Alexander does it, actually.
Hmm.
Like whenever he's recorded me, we'll sit down and we just start talking, and then I'm kind of going, well, dude, like I gotta go in a little while. When are we gonna start? He's like, no, we've been going for 20 minutes. I was like, this is the podcast? Wait, hold up.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a kind of a cool way to do it, actually, because then I don't know, it's a totally different dynamic. It gets people's guard down, and they don't feel like, oh, okay, now I'm on 3, 2, 1. Hi, you don't get that. It's just you get them, and then it's a continuation of them, not really knowing where the start or finish of the thing is. It's more conversational. So anyway, that's the last thing I say.
All right. It's a wrap. We're done. Adios, folks.